everybody, in this video today we're going to talk about a question that I hear quite often when I'm with somebody who's not from the Midwest, not from Indianapolis, this area, because this pertains to not just Indianapolis, but a lot of places in the Midwest. If you're not from here, you're not used to seeing stuff like this right behind me. These ponds or lakes, just little bodies of water, you see all over the place in Indianapolis and other suburbs too around Indianapolis, like Fishers, Indiana, Carmel, Indiana, Greenwood, Indiana, Greenfield, Indiana, Plainfield, any of the cities and towns surrounding Indianapolis. You're gonna find these things all over the place. So what are these for? Why do we see so many? That's what we're gonna cover in this video. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, I'm Jason Compton with the Compton Home Group. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time to the channel and you want everything there is to know about living in Indianapolis or any of the cities and towns that surround Indianapolis, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also tap the little bell so you're notified every time we do a new video. Now we have people reaching out to us from all over the country with questions about Indianapolis, and like what we're going to talk about today, these things that you see right here behind me. Actually, this fountain's pretty loud, so if you were living anywhere near this, you'd certainly be able to hear that. But if you have questions about what's the purpose of this thing, actually it looks really nice, that's for sure, and it would be kind of nice living next to this, but there is a deeper purpose to it. So if you have questions about things like that or just places to live in Indianapolis, and make sure you reach out any way you know how. We'll always have your back with those questions, and we'll certainly have your back when it comes time for you to make your move to the Indy Metro. Again, I am next to a pond in a suburb of Indianapolis. I'm actually in Fishers, Indiana right now, but Indianapolis is very, very close by, just off to the south. Where I'm standing, you can get to the Nickel Plate Trail just off to the east, and I-69 is just off to the east. You can jump on that and be in Indianapolis in really just a couple of minutes. Even on that Nickel Plate Trail, you can jump on your bike or walk down to 96th Street, and then boom, you're in Indianapolis. And just north of me here is 116th, just south of me is 106th Street, so I'm not that far from it. But this is a pretty typical place to talk about these ponds or lakes. They're really, I guess, ponds. There's I think a definition of what a pond actually is, or a lake. I think a pond, you can see the bottom of it, something along those lines. I'm not a naturalist, so I don't know the true definition of the difference between the two, but some people will call these lakes, some will call them ponds. I'll call it a pond because technically this is a retention pond, and it has a really nice fountain in it. A little bit loud, I'm standing right here, but actually it sounds kind of nice. Running water or splashing water, other than maybe making you have to pee a little bit, it's a pretty cool sound, especially if you got your windows open or you're outside at your place. Hearing something like that, kind of a nice little background noise. But these things, this one really looks nice. Looks really nice through here. But there are some that maybe don't look quite as nice and can maybe be a bit of an eyesore, but most of them aren't. So if you live close to one of these in a neighborhood, it's probably going to look pretty decent. So there are a couple different styles for these. This one, and then there's one nearby that we'll go to here in a minute. I'm gonna kind of walk over that way. So there's a reason that these exist. And I'm out here on actually what's been a pretty rainy couple of days in the summer. And usually it doesn't rain a ton over days in a row in the summer in Indianapolis, but we're kind of in a little stretch here where we've got a couple days worth of rain, and it's gonna on its way out at this point. So it's cloudy still, but a little bit later today it's probably gonna get sunny and really nice. But we've probably had an inch, maybe 2 inches of rain in the past couple of days, so it's rained a lot. Now because of that, because Indianapolis and central Indiana gets quite a lot of rain over the course of the year, we actually probably get more than what people think. We get over 40 inches of rain a year, and that's actually more rain than what a place like Seattle gets, which has a rainy reputation. They just get their rain in really little spurts for the most part over a really long period of the year. We, on the other hand, go long spells or days without any rain, and then we'll get a thunderstorm or a storm system that comes through, and it might dump 1/4 of an inch of rain, 1/2 an inch of rain, or maybe even an inch of rain over the course of a day. And we could get 4 or maybe 5 inches of rain in a month. And so, of course, over the course of the year, that starts to add up. Now, as I'm walking down this road, I'm walking on a sidewalk. There's a road right here next to me. Here's a big church right across the street. And then as I'm looking over here, this is a neighborhood. And when that rain comes, rain of course falls on the ground and it'll soak into the ground. So it'll soak into grassy areas, plains, trees, forests, whatever. And that's really what used to be here hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. There weren't all these buildings and roads. So when that rain falls and now hits the rooftops, it hits the roads and it can't soak into the ground. It has to go somewhere. And so when you're building a neighborhood like this, you have to account for that. People will ask, what are all these ponds for? But usually what's the question before that, or a question just after that, is do you see a lot of flooding in this area? And the answer is no. We have different floodplains, of course, around creeks and rivers. And if you're really close to those, then you could be in a floodplain. But outside of that, you're not in a floodplain. So this whole area here is not considered floodplain. If you were to buy a house here, you're not going to be required to have flood insurance in order to get your mortgage, even if you lived right on the water like we were back there just a minute ago. And I'm coming up here on a different retention pond, big pond, lake, whatever you want to call it, but it's truly a retention pond because a lot of that water that falls in the form of rain or even snow or sleet or hail, and it eventually of course turns into liquid water, it has to go somewhere. So since it can't get into the ground, you have to direct it and tell it where to go. And for the most part, a lot of it goes down into the storm drains and then eventually makes it to reservoirs like Geist Reservoir or into rivers and streams. The White River is a big river that runs through Indianapolis. Very shallow one though. It's not a navigable river like an Ohio River or Mississippi River, something like that, but it's a river that runs through Indianapolis and some of the rainwater ends up there too. But if you didn't have a place for that water to go, then yeah, you're definitely gonna see some flooding. I'm coming up here just on a storm drain. So after all that rain just fell, a lot of that made its way right down into that storm drain. But some of it of course made it into the ground, and then a lot of it made its way into something like this. Now this is really nice. So you've got some homes that back right up to it. Now they don't have tremendous backyards, like huge or anything, but they do have a little bit of space. And then the major feature would just be living on the water, living on this retention pond. And it makes for kind of a nice look. You may not want to live on the water, but some people really do. And on the water, the price of the home, if that home is exactly the same as a different one in the neighborhood, but it backs up to, let's say, some other homes, this one probably is gonna be a little bit more expensive because of this. It's a little bit more private. But this retention pond has drainage that a lot of the water from the neighborhood will make its way into this pond. And a retention pond is something that will hold water until it gets to a certain height. There's a riser in here, and actually it could be multiple risers, and that riser is above the water level. So if the water level starts to rise up to that riser, it'll spill out and then eventually get into the storm drains and end up where a lot of the rainwater ends up anyway. It's just a way of kind of delaying the process and not overwhelming the storm drains whenever we get a lot of rain with all of this runoff. So you have to have a place to put it, because normally, instead of these roads and roofs, like I was saying a minute ago, normally it can soak into the ground, but now it's running off. You have to hold it for a little while to allow the storm drains to manage some of the water, and then this can be managed after that. So this right here, a lot of people will question, are you at risk of getting any kind of flooding at your house? Do you require flood insurance? And the answer is no. And the risk, of course, I guess could be there, but it's extremely minimal. When the water level here rises enough and then dumps into that overflow, that riser, to get out into the storm drains, that's going to take care of it. The only way you could really get any flooding is if all the exit points for this water were blocked. So of course there's some maintenance involved, and so there's a cost to that. So when you get into an HOA, you'll usually have an HOA fee, and that HOA fee pays for, at minimum, some of the maintenance of the common grounds, like the entrance to the neighborhood, the sign, the lighting, mowing around that, the insurance for it, but also the maintenance of something like this. Now back over there at the other lake that we were taking a look at, compared to this one doesn't have a fountain. The other one did. Now that fountain is over there for looks, but also a purpose too, is to keep the water moving. This over here looks much more still and calm, but out there in the center, there are multiple aerators. So it's a little pump underneath the water that produces air bubbles and keeps the water moving. Because of course, if this is completely stagnant and doesn't move, especially if we get a long period of time where we don't have a lot of rain and it's really hot, like this particular summer has been, then it can start to breed mosquitoes. But if you keep the water moving, you still can have mosquitoes. This is a wet area, so if you're prone to being eaten alive by mosquitoes, living near water, it doesn't matter if it's moving or not, you're gonna find places that aren't really moving all that much and wet, and of course mosquitoes are gonna be there. So it's something you just have to keep in mind, but it helps to prevent them from building up too much. Now the fountain over there is much more violent or really pushing that water around. This is a little bit more subtle, but that stuff has to be maintained. Electricity has to go to it. If they break down, somebody has to pay for the repair of that or a new one, and that's where some of the HOA comes in. Plus, you have to insure all of this. Now, having a body of water close to homes like this, there's liability, a lot of liability. You can have accidents out here, of course. This in the wintertime can freeze up, and it can get tempting to where, hey, I need to walk out on that. But you'll notice in most of these retention ponds, it's basically gonna say everything that's on here. You might see no fishing sometimes, although this one I know people actually fish. I'll see people along this bank from time to time. Essentially, no fun at all. So it should just say no fun. If this isn't a recreation lake, you can't really do much here. And most of that has to do with the liability because somebody has to insure this, and the HOA is going to do that. Part of your HOA fee is going to go towards that insurance on these. So a lot of people who aren't from here will have questions about these retention ponds, which are extremely common. You see them all over the place in a tremendous number of neighborhoods in Indianapolis, where I am in Fishers today, Carmel, Avon, Plainfield, it doesn't matter where you are. If it's a subdivision of some kind, it's probably gonna have a retention pond or something like this nearby. It's surprising to some people who aren't from the Midwest. So if you have questions about anything like this in a neighborhood, anywhere around Indianapolis, happy to answer those questions for you. So reach out any way you know how. Until the next one, we'll see you later.